All right, I want to strengthen that interior. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to roll a coil and I'm gonna put the coil around the whole inside of the piece. You can just take a chunk of your scrap clay. You want the clay to be soft because you want to be able to work it into the piece, and you're just gonna roll out a coil. You do not want a big, fat, thick coil. You want a skinny coil. Does not matter if it is even in all places. If it breaks, use little bits and keep going around the piece. It doesn't matter. So my coil is pretty thin. I'm gonna just run some score lines through it just to help it sort of sit in that space. And then I'm gonna start. One thing that I like to do is not have a coil start where a seam is or where a corner is. So if I have a seam, I'm gonna overlap the seam to make sure that the coil doesn't start right at that spot. So here was a seam. I'm making sure that my coil is not starting at that spot. And then I'm going to push the coil in. I'm supporting the wall from the outside as I pull that coil up. And it's a little hard because I'm working backwards, but it's all good. Make it work. So I not only want to smear that coil up into the top, but I also want to put it into the bottom. My hand stays on the outside at all times to make sure that I'm not changing the shape of the wall as I'm smearing this coil into the inside. All right, so I'm just gonna continue to wrap a coil around the entire interior of this piece. All right, so I've done a pretty good job at smearing that whole coil in. One thing that I will say is a good place to strengthen is also where you have your seams. So I'm gonna take another little piece of coil and I'm just gonna go around and I'm gonna make sure that my seams have some extra support to them. Anytime that I'm smearing anything in, whether it was the coil at the base or the coil right here, I am just making sure that I'm supporting from the outside. After I get this thicker piece over where the seam is, I'm gonna go ahead and look at the outside seam. So here it looks a little messed up, and I'm just going to go over that again. Throughout this process, your piece will probably look a little sloppy to you and you're gonna hate it, but just trust me, once we can flip it over and sort of start to refine that other edge, things will come out really nice. All right, so from here, I'm just gonna transfer off this board back to my other board. I don't recommend you picking your piece up like that until it's set up enough that you can do so. My bottom is set up because I had it on cement board. My top, not so much because it's just been exposed to air. One thing that you might find helpful at this point is have somebody help you get some plastic underneath it and then work on it on top of plastic, especially if you feel like that bottom piece is setting up. Work on top of plastic so that way when it comes to wrap it up at the end of the period, you can just wrap the plastic around it instead of lifting it. And then when you come to work on it some more, as long as it takes you to get this coil put in and then this next step, just leave the plastic underneath it. All right, so your top piece is gonna look really marred and messed up, and that's okay because we're about to mess it up a little bit more. So you're just gonna go around and score the whole outside or the whole top part. Both sides should be beveled because when you cut the bottom piece, you cut them on a bevel at that point for both sides. My walls are super floppy right now. If I were to put the top piece on here, it would probably collapse and concave itself. So I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to prepare for the top piece by putting a coil, not on top of the bevel, but just right sort of where that flat, clean part meets the beveled part. So I rolled out a few more coils before to prepare for this. If your top piece is a little dry, you might find that slip helps to just get this to attach a little bit better. My goal is to get slip into these bottles for you guys. See if that happens. And then you're just gonna attach this right below that bevel part. What we're doing is we are creating a thicker ledge for the top piece to rest on. Without this, there's a good chance that our walls will just collapse down. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the coil around the rest of the piece and then start to smush it in as well. So I have the coil attached around the whole interior. I know that I'm not going to stop tonight until I finish getting this all compressed and smushed in. Only put as much coil as you think you can compress in one period. If you come back the next class, there's a good chance that that piece of clay will have stiffened up and make your job of incorporating it really hard. So make sure that you only do as much as you can finish in the time that you have. So what I think is a good idea is to start with one, see how long it took you, and then use your judgment. All right, so I'm just gonna go around and compress this in. I'm not too concerned if this goes above that line because when I go to attach the top, I'm gonna sort of score this whole thing so that they work as one. So especially if I have a really thin part, I'm okay if it goes on a little bit more up than down. If you have a piece of coil that came out, where did that go? Really thin, just take a little extra clay and add it to there. You really want to have a nice shelf for the top part to stick onto. So it doesn't matter how even it is. For most projects in here, I don't want things that are heavy, but for these, I'm okay with it because we need structure and support. So make sure as you're pressing that you're not pressing out your wall too thin. You want to press the coil down into the piece without pressing out too much. So I'm working on compressing into the bottom. The top part, I'm going to score like crazy, and that's going to incorporate those two pieces together. So I'm not gonna really worry too much about the top part. Other than making sure that it's pushed in, I'm not gonna worry if I press it all the way in. My goal here is to steal some of the clay that I added in that coil and give it to the really thinned out beveled part at the top. So I'm just using the serrated rib to score around the top and make sure, I'm making sure that those pieces are really incorporated together. So my coil's incorporated, my bottom coil is incorporated. I'm fussy, so I'm gonna go ahead and fuss with this a bunch. I'm gonna fuss with it a bunch to make sure that the inside, I know nobody's gonna see it, but for some reason I care a lot. So I'm gonna make sure the inside looks a little bit nicer. These walls are still too floppy, definitely not strong enough to hold putting the top piece on yet. So from here, it's gonna be a waiting game. I could kind of hit them with a blow dryer if I wanted to help set them up a little bit, making sure that I don't set them up so much that they're really stiff. And if I'm gonna go with the blow dryer, I'm gonna avoid this top. This can stay wet. What we're looking for to get set up are the wall pieces. All right, so I'm just gonna fuss around with this, and then in the next segment, we will see how to put the top on.